My daughter blocked my number the morning we buried my wife. 46 calls had rung out over 3 weeks. One message said 3 sentences. Dad, I can't do this right now. Please don't reach out, I'll call when I can. On the 47th call, on a Tuesday at 7:09 in the morning, a stranger answered her phone. He said, Mr. Tate, my name is Rudy Hatch. I am your daughter's landlord. The checks your daughter has been sending me for the past 4 months have a different account number printed on the memo line every single time. I think your daughter is being moved out of her own life. I felt my hands go cold around the pipe wrench in my belt loop. The wrench my wife had engraved Cora in copper letters on the morning our daughter was born. 5 words is what I said. I'll be there by morning. That call was the first thing I did. It was not the last thing I did. What I found inside my daughter's kitchen cabinet, in a recipe box my wife had given her on her wedding day, in a pencil letter Helen had written 3 days before she died, is the reason my granddaughter got her name back. If you've ever had your number blocked by your own child, if you've ever heard a stranger's voice say your daughter's name first, hit subscribe. You belong here. Drop me a note in the comments. I want to read it. But before I tell you what was in that pencil letter, you need to know how a 64-year-old retired bus mechanic from a small town on the Connecticut River ended up holding a stranger's voice in his dead wife's bedroom on a Tuesday at 9:11 in the morning, listening to a man describe a kind of stealing I had never heard of before. My name is Frank Tate. I am 64 years old. I worked the graveyard shift in the bus garage in Brattleboro, Vermont, for 36 years, the kind of garage where you can tell a man's whole week by the way he lays out his wrenches at the end of his shift. I retired 3 years ago, when Helen started needing help in the mornings. Helen was my wife for 38 years. She had been the secretary at the alternative ed high school in town, and she had been the one in our family who remembered birthdays, who balanced the checkbook, who knew how many stamps we had on the Visa bill. She made a blackberry cobbler in the summer that I asked for on my birthday for 34 of those years. We had one daughter, Cora, born in October 1991, in the upstairs bedroom of the house we still live in, on Lincoln Street, 2 blocks from the Connecticut River. Helen had been in labor for 19 hours. The midwife handed me the baby at 7 minutes before midnight on the 11th, and I walked into the kitchen at 6 the next morning, and Helen, who had not slept, who could not sit without pain, said, Frank, find the wrench under the sink. The big one, the one my father gave us. I pulled it out. It was the 14-inch adjustable pipe wrench my father-in-law had given me in 1987, the year before Cora was born. Helen had used a small hammer and a sharp punch to engrave the 4 letters of her name into the soft steel of the wrench handle. C-O-R. We did not own much. We never did. We owned a house, a small pension, a savings account at the credit union, and a wrench with my daughter's name on it. I told Helen she was supposed to be resting. Helen said, Frank, a daughter should have a thing that is hers. I put the wrench on the pegboard in my garage and never took it down for 43 years. Our holidays were simple. We put a wreath on the door in December. We hosted Christmas Eve with Helen's sister, Pat, and Pat's wife, Linda, and their 2 kids. On New Year's morning, Helen would pull out the blackberry cobbler recipe from a shoebox on the top shelf of the coat closet. The recipe was on an index card in Helen's handwriting. There was a smudge of grease on it from the year, in 2008, when Cora had tried to make it herself at school for a bake sale and had written, Mom, this is the wrong pan in the corner, and Helen had answered underneath in 2 words, Bake, kid. That recipe card had been the kitchen's compass for 26 years. Cora grew up. She was a quiet child, careful with words, careful with money, careful with people. She went to a state school in Burlington. She studied physical therapy. She came home in 2014 and took a job at the rehab clinic on the backside of Brattleboro Memorial. She rented a small apartment above the bakery on Main. She came by the house every Sunday for dinner. She brought her mother fresh lilacs from the garden when they came up. She knew how to make the cobbler. She knew how to make the coffee cake Helen had baked for every Sunday morning of her childhood. Helen had been training her gently since she was 9 years old, and we both knew it. Then, 4 years ago, Cora met Jude Banks. Jude was 38 when he came around. He had a used Toyota Tundra and a signet ring that he turned with his thumb when he was talking, the way a man turns a ring when he is rehearsing what to say. He said he was in commercial real estate. He said he had just closed a deal in Manchester. He had a smile that deployed in the right places but never quite hid his eyes. Helen did not like him. Helen could not, in 3 years, say what was wrong with Jude Banks. She only said, in the kitchen after he left, "Frank, when a man holds his ring that much, he is not finished with it. He is using it." I told Helen I was being unfair. Helen said, "I hope so." In 2022, Helen was diagnosed with breast cancer. Stage 2. She went through chemotherapy through the winter. She lost her hair in February. She sat on the porch with a knit hat on, and Cora came twice a week to bring groceries and to sit with her, and Jude came twice a week to drive Helen to infusion. I told Jude on the porch in March, "Jude, you don't have to come to every appointment. We can take her." Jude said, "Frank, Helen and I are close. I want to be there." Helen, who was sitting right there, said quietly, "Frank, let Jude drive." I let Jude drive. In August of 2024, the cancer came back, in her liver and in her spine. By October, she was bedbound. By November, she was sleeping 18 hours a day. On a Sunday in early December, she woke up long enough to take Cora's hand at the edge of the bed and to say 4 things in this exact order. Don't marry him. Keep the wrench. Make the cobbler. Send your father the recipe box. I did not understand the third one. Cora said, "Mom, what recipe box?" Helen said, "The recipe box in the linen closet, sweetheart. The blue one. On the top shelf. Send it to Dad. Don't open it. Send it to him. He will know when." Helen died on December 14, 2024. We held the funeral on December 21st, on a Tuesday, in the cold, in the small chapel behind the hospital, where Helen's mother had been buried in 2003. There were 41 people in the room. Jude Banks was there in a black coat with the same signet ring. He did not sit next to Cora. He sat 3 rows back alone. I did not speak to him that day. I could not make my mouth say his name without pushing my jaw to one side. After the service in the parking lot, Cora walked me to the truck. I had put my arms around her by the rear bumper. I had not cried all day. The first time I cried was at the rear bumper of my truck, holding my daughter. Cora withdrew. She said, "Dad, I love you. But I need space. I need to grieve the way I grieve. I need us not to talk for some time." I said, "Cora, how long?" She said, "I don't know. Please don't reach out." That was December 21st, 2024. Over the next 3 weeks, I called 46 times. She picked up once, on December 26th, and said 4 words. "Dad, I love you. Stop." Then her number was blocked. The next ring went to a voicemail recording that said the person I was calling had not set up voicemail. The 47th call, on January 14th, is the call I have already told you about. That call was from Rudy Hatch. Rudy was 61 years old. He had run the 3-flat above the bookstore on Main Street in Burlington for 19 years. He had never raised Cora's rent more than $40 a year. He had been the one who found Cora's cat in the alley in 2017 and brought it up the back stairs in his coat. He had never asked me to call him before. He asked me twice. I called him back at 9:11 that morning, before the kettle boiled, before I had put on my coat. I said, "Rudy, talk to me." Rudy said, "Mr. Tate, your daughter's check started to bounce in September." I was patient. She had never missed a payment in 6 years. In October, she told me her bank had changed the routing number on her account. That happens. I gave her the new number. In December, she told me the same thing again, that her bank had changed the routing number. By January, she had given me 3 different routing numbers for what she said was the same account. Each one of those routing numbers belonged to a different bank. Mr. Tate, a checking account does not move between banks every month. The only way 3 checks have 3 different routing numbers on the memo line is if she has been handing me checks from 3 different accounts, none of which are hers. and there are no deposits coming in for Cora. There is money moving out, but not into her. I sat down on Helen's side of the bed. I held the wrench in my right hand. I said, "Rudy, has anyone come with her?" Rudy said, "A man. Tall. Signet ring. Came down 3 times in the past 2 months and signed the lease renewals for the apartment in the daughter's name, though the daughter was standing right behind him. He signs her name. She has not signed her own lease in months." I said, "Rudy, is she safe?" Rudy said, "I don't think my job is to know that, Mr. Tate. I know what an eviction looks like, and this is not eviction. This is what comes before eviction." I drove to Burlington that afternoon. The drive is 2.5 hours, north on Interstate 91, then west on 89. I drove the truck. I carried the wrench in my coat pocket. I drove the speed limit, which I almost never do, but I had the feeling that if I let myself move too fast I would lose my hands. I dozed off once on the rise before White River Junction, and the rig of the wrench against my thigh woke me up. I parked on Main Street in Burlington. I sat in the cab for 5 minutes. Then I went up the back stairs to the apartment above the bookstore, because that was where Rudy had told me the door was. Cora opened the door. She had not lost weight. She had not been touched. She had not been hit. She had a haircut I did not recognize. She had mascara on that I had not seen her wear in 20 years. She saw me and she said, "Dad, how did you get here?" I said, "Cora, I want to see the kitchen." We walked to the kitchen. The kitchen was different. The yellow dish towels Helen had sent her were still on the oven handle. The blue box Helen had sent her for Christmas, 2018, the recipe box, was on the top shelf of her built-in pantry, beside a stack of legal-sized envelopes stamped with a return address I did not recognize. The recipe box still had the small chip in the corner Helen had made when she was carrying it up the attic stairs. The blue color was faded in the shape of a thumb where Helen had gripped it the most. I said, "Cora, did Mom ever tell you to send me that recipe box?" Cora said, "She told me to send it. I have not sent it." I said, "Why?" Cora said, "Because Jude said the box contained a copy of Helen's will, and he said you would use the will to take Cora's share of the estate to support your own retirement. And he said if I mailed the box to you it would give you leverage." I said, "Cora? The box is a recipe box. There's a recipe card in it. The card is a blackberry cobbler." Cora said, "Jude said the cobbler recipe had a clause in Matryoshka ink. There is no such thing as Matryoshka ink." I asked her to hand me the box. She handed it down. I sat at her kitchen table. I opened the blue box. The top card was the blackberry cobbler. The card underneath, in a slip of paper folded twice, was the pencil letter, in Helen's handwriting, dated December 11th, 3 days before she died. The letter said, "Frank, if you're reading this, I am gone. There is a recipe card on the back of this letter. Read the back. The card facing you is the recipe. The pencil is the only witness. Frank, I knew there was something wrong with him a year before you did. I did not say anything because I wanted Cora to learn it on her own, and I wanted her to learn it without using me as the reason. I should have said it. I have not said it. Do not let her give him anything that has her name on it. Do not let him drive her to infusion again. Do not let him sign anything. He has been signing things since August. P.S. The wrench is hers. Don't bury it. Send it to her after. H. On the back of the letter, in Helen's handwriting, were 2 words, "Get help." I sat at Cora's kitchen table and I read the letter twice. Then I read it a 3rd time. Then I said 4 things to my daughter. I said them in this order. "Cora, I love you. Helen knew, I knew, and the man who has been telling you to block my number has been forging your signature since August. I am going to prove that, and I am going to do it without ever making a scene at your dinner table." Cora said, "Dad, how?" I said, "Watch me." I did not call Jude that night. I did not confront Cora at dinner. I did not raise my voice. I drove back to Brattleboro. I called Rudy Hatch from the diner on the corner of Flat and Main, and I bought him a ham sandwich on his shift. And I said, "Rudy, I need to ask you to do something. I need you to keep renting to Cora until I tell you to stop. I will pay the rent myself if I have to. I need to ask you to mail me every envelope Cora has dropped in your mailbox in the past 4 months, unopened. Rudy said, Mr. Tate, that's reasonable. I said, Rudy, don't open them. Don't lose them, especially the ones stamped with a red logo. Rudy said, I see those too. Tall man brings them by Tuesdays and Fridays. Rudy sent the envelopes the next morning, 11 of them, stamped with a return address in Manchester, Cardinal Asset Counselors. I did not know the firm. I opened them at my kitchen table on Tuesday night. Inside was, on each, a printed wire confirmation slip, with a routing number, with a wire account, with a memo line that contained, in plain text, the words, Cora Tate, withdrawal, followed by a 4-digit PIN I did not know. Each slip was signed by a man whose signature did not match the signature Cora had used in her own handwriting on the receipts I had seen as a child. The signature began, every time, with a small loop at the top of the C, a precision the man who signed it had practiced, the signature of a man who has signed another person's name more than 100 times. Each withdrawal was for an amount between $4,500 and $9,200. The total, across 11 months, was $86,300. 12 was the next month. 12 was the draft, on the card I was holding. 12 was already written, in the same looped C. I called a woman I had worked with at the credit union, a manager named Molly Kane, who had retired in 2022. I said, Molly, I have a situation I need guidance on, but I cannot tell you the names. Molly said, Frank, you can tell me anything. Molly read the slips on speaker. Molly said, Frank, those are not withdrawals. Those are wires, off ledger. They have been going to a firm registered in Delaware, and they have a pattern that matches a known product, a kind of manufactured cash flow that lets a single person move another person's funds into a structure the IRS does not yet classify. Molly said, Frank, have you heard of a quiet trust? I said, Molly, I am a bus mechanic. Molly said, I know. That's why I'm calling. Tell no one for 2 weeks. Gather the paper, then call the State Bureau of Securities. I called my friend Tony's daughter, who is a paralegal. I called Tony himself, who is a private investigator I have known since my daughter was 3. Tony said, Frank, come in tomorrow. Bring the slips. Don't bring the wrench. I said, Tony, the wrench is going with me. At Tony's office in Keene, New Hampshire, on Wednesday afternoon, Tony read the slips, called his contact at the New Hampshire Bureau of Securities, and put me on speaker. The contact's name was Mira. Mira said, Frank, we have an open file on a firm calling itself Cardinal Asset Counselors, registered in Delaware, operating in Vermont and New Hampshire. The firm's registered agent is a Mr. Jude Banks. Mr. Banks is the brother of the firm's marketing officer. He is also the only person on documents as a beneficiary. I said, Mira, what firm is he running? Mira said, he is running a quiet trust, drawn off the back of 2 families in your community, including your daughters. I asked Mira, what do I need to do? Mira said, Frank, you need to do nothing. The Bureau will reach out. The Bureau needs 2 more weeks of paper. They will be in touch. I called Rudy on the way home. I said, Rudy, the Bureau is going to be in touch with you. Are you willing to file a complaint about the lease forgeries? Rudy said, Mr. Tate, I have been waiting for someone to ask me that for a year. The first set of forgeries came in on Jude's letterhead. I have a packet. I said, Rudy, send it. The Bureau reached me 2 weeks later on a Friday afternoon in early February. The complaint file was opened. The complaint file would eventually go to the Attorney General's office. The Bureau did not want me to confront Banks. I told them I had no plan to. I told them I had not spoken to Banks in months, and I did not intend to. I did not, however, have a plan to remain silent forever. I had a plan for one conversation. I had a plan for the conversation Helen had wanted Cora to have without me in the room. I called Cora on a Thursday morning in mid-February. I said, Cora, I have something for you. Will you have lunch with me tomorrow? Just us. No, Jude, I will not bring it up if you don't. Cora said, Dad, 11 to 1? I said, yes. Where? She said, the diner on the corner of Flat and Main, where Mom used to take me after synagogue. I said, that's the place. I drove to Burlington again the next day. I carried the recipe box. I carried the wrench in my coat pocket. I carried 2 envelopes I had not shown anyone yet. We sat at the diner. Cora did not order coffee. She ordered eggs. She was quieter than I had remembered. She looked older. She still wore her mother's ring on her right hand. I said, Cora, I have 3 things for you, and I will let you decide what to do with each of them. The first is the remedy for what has been happening with your accounts. The second is the help your mother asked you to accept. The third is from me, and I will not press. I set the first envelope on the table. It was a copy of the Bureau's reply letter, addressed to me, naming cardinal asset counselors and referring them to the Attorney General. I said, Cora, this is what Jude has been running against your money. There is a quiet trust. There is a firm in Delaware with your last withdrawals on its books. The Bureau is investigating. Cora stared at the envelope. She did not open it. I set the second envelope on the table. It was a sealed letter from Mira. It was addressed to Cora. It contained, in summary, what had happened to her accounts and what her options were. I said, Cora, this is the letter from an investigator at the State Bureau. She is going to call you at noon on Monday. Answer the phone. Cora said, Dad, she will know about Jude. I said, Cora, Jude is what she knows. Cora said nothing. I set the third envelope on the table. It was the wrench. I put the wrench on the table between us. I said, Cora, your mother had me put your name on this the day you were born. She told me, 3 days before she died, that it was always yours, and that I was to send it to you after. I am sending it to you after. Cora stared at the wrench. She reached out and touched it, but she did not pick it up. I said, Cora, I have one more thing. I have to say it out loud because your mother would have wanted me to say it, and because you need to hear it from a man who has spent 40 years teaching his hands to be correct. Cora, you are not in love with Jude. You are in debt to Jude. There is a difference. The woman who is in love with Jude would not be sitting here in a diner off Flat Street, afraid to answer a phone on Monday. The woman who is in debt to Jude is sitting here telling her father no, but afraid that saying yes will cost her. There is no real choice between us that costs you. There is only the truth that saves you. And the truth is on the table. Cora said, Dad, he has the apartment lease in his name. I said, he has papers signed with your name by him. The Bureau knows. Rudy knows. I know. He does not have an apartment lease. He has 11 months of fraud. Cora said, Dad, what do I do? I said, Cora, take the wrench home with you today. Put it on your kitchen counter. Do not put it away. Look at it Monday morning, when the phone rings. Take the call from Mira. Take the call from the Bureau. Call them on their number, not on a number Jude gives you. Do not let Jude drive you to the meeting. Take a cab. Take a friend. Take Rudy Hatch. Then, when you have done that, do one more thing. Open the blue recipe box your mother gave you. Read the pencil letter. Do not let Jude read it. And cook your father a blackberry cobbler in August, and bring it to me in our kitchen on Lincoln Street. Cora picked up the wrench. She did not open the envelopes. She put the wrench in her bag. She said, Dad, can I hug you? I said yes. We hugged. People at the next table were looking. I let them look. I have never been ashamed of hugging my daughter in front of strangers. On the way out, I left $26 in cash on the table for the waitress who had been there the day Helen brought Cora in for her first blueberry pancake in 1994. The waitress, who was then 38 and is now 68, said, Frank, are you Helen's husband? I said, I am Helen's husband. She said, she is missed. Cora went home. I drove back to Brattleboro. On Monday at 9:01 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Cora. She said, Dad, Mira called. I am on a recorded line. They have asked me to come in Tuesday. I said, Cora, do you want me to come? She said, no. Rudy Hatch is driving. I said, Cora, that is the first good decision you've made in 11 months. She said, "Dad, are you proud of me?" I said, "Cora, I have always been proud of you." On Tuesday afternoon, Jude Banks was contacted by the Bureau at his office in Manchester. On Wednesday, he was contacted by his firm's compliance counsel. By Thursday, his signet ring was no longer on his hand. By Friday, Mira had asked for an emergency preservation order against the Delaware Trust. By the following Monday, Jude had retained a criminal defense attorney. By the second Friday in March, Jude Banks had been charged with 2 counts of grand larceny, 1 count of forgery, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. I want to be very careful here. The state did not press charges because I had discovered the truth. The state pressed charges because the wires had crossed state lines, and because Rudy Hatch had the original lease forgeries, and because Mira had the timeline. The state also cleared Cora's accounts. The state returned $74,400 of the $86,300 to Cora's restored trust, with interest. The state did not restore the 11 months. The Bureau's letter to me said the 11 months had been a price the family had paid in the shape of a year inside their own house. On April 12, 2026, the morning of the third morning of the trial, Jude pleaded guilty to all counts. He was sentenced to 42 months in a state facility, with 5 years of supervised release, with full restitution owed, and with an order permanently barring him from holding a fiduciary position in any financial services firm in the state of Vermont. He did not write to Cora. He did not call. His attorney sent a single letter to me, in care of my attorney, asking if I would be willing to consider whether restitution payments were appropriate. I did not respond. I sat in Helen's chair and looked at her recipe card for the cobbler, and I did not respond. Cora moved back to Brattleboro in June. She took a lease on a small apartment above the bookstore, the same apartment she had lost, because Rudy had set the first month aside. She found a new physical therapy clinic. She came by the house for dinner every Sunday. She made the cobbler in August. She made it twice, once for the table, and once for a Sunday morning she said she wanted to remember. The wrench lives on her kitchen counter, beside the blue recipe box, beside the cobbler recipe card that has the grease spot from the bake sale in 2008. The granddaughter did not, in the end, get her name back because of a court. The granddaughter got her name back because Cora called her in October to say, "Mom, I have a name again. My daughter has been calling every Sunday. She has been coming by the house. She has been drinking coffee at the table where her mother used to sit. She has been doing all the things her mother wanted her to do. I am 65 years old now. The porch smells like rain off the river. The pipe wrench lives with Cora, on her counter, where I can see it when I visit. I have not asked for it back. If you've ever had a number blocked by your own child, if you've ever been told to respect their process while the people who are hurting them move into their kitchen, drop me a note. I will read it. I will not be able to answer everyone, but I will read it. And if this channel has ever made you feel like the father you actually are, subscribe and stay. There are more stories like this on this channel. Most of them end at a kitchen table, with a recipe box, and with a daughter who finally says, "Dad, are you proud of me?"